Homeless boy shared his coat
Come on,
with
let's
a
get you
lost biker's
inside.
daughter. The truth shocked
Cold out
everyone.
here.
The cold had already decided she wouldn't last another hour. She stood under the broken streetlight, shaking so hard her teeth knocked, fingers blue where they clutched the empty air. Cars passed without slowing. A bus hissed at the corner and pulled away. No one noticed her until the boy stopped, stared for half a second, and did the one thing that made no sense at all. He took off his coat, not halfway, not offering an edge. He pulled it over her shoulders, wrapped it tight, and held it there when her knees buckled. Somewhere far down the road, engines were already turning back toward this block, and the truth, still hidden, was moving fast. If he walked away now, she would disappear. If he stayed, nothing would ever be the same. Before we continue, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. She hadn't meant to be alone. That was the part no one would believe later, when the story grew sharp edges and needed someone to blame. It started with noise, too much of it, and ended with silence she didn't know how to fill. A wrong turn. A door that closed too quickly. A moment where everyone assumed someone else was paying attention. By the time she realized she didn't recognize the street anymore, the city had thinned into long shadows and broken lights. The cold crept in quietly, the way it always did when you weren't prepared to fight it. She tried to keep moving. Movement meant control. Control meant safety. It didn't work. Her legs slowed first, then her hands. Fear came later, heavy and embarrassing, when she understood no one was coming just because she needed them to. That was when she saw him. He stood near the curb, pack at his feet, shoulders hunched against the night. He didn't look surprised to see her there. He didn't look relieved either. He looked like someone who recognized a problem without needing it explained. "You shouldn't stop," she said, voice thin. "It's cold." "I know," he replied. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she'd come from. He took a step closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth leaving him, and shrugged out of the coat like it was a decision already made. "No," she said automatically. "You need that." He shook his head and wrapped it around her anyway, pulling the collar up to block the wind. His hands were rough and careful at the same time, the kind of hands that knew what cold did to people if you let it. "You're shaking," he said. "So are you," she replied. "Mine's optional," he said. She laughed once, a sound that cracked halfway out and turned into a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He guided her toward the bus stop bench, sat her down, and stayed standing, back to the wind, body angled like he'd done this before. "Stay awake," he said. "Talk if you can." "What if I can't?" she asked. "Then I'll talk," he replied. She told him useless things, about a dog she used to see on her street, about a song stuck in her head, about how the streetlight flickered like it couldn't decide what it wanted to be. He listened like every word mattered, nodding, answering when she trailed off. A car slowed across the street, didn't stop. Another passed. He watched the road between sentences, counting gaps, measuring how long it would take help to arrive if someone decided help was necessary. He didn't know she was being searched for yet. He didn't know that a citywide net was tightening, quiet and precise, that radios were already passing descriptions without names. He only knew that the cold was winning. "Why are you here?" she asked suddenly. He shrugged. "Because this bench blocks the wind." "That's not an answer." "It's enough of one," he said. She studied his face, the way his breath fogged, the way his hands had gone pale without him mentioning it. Something in her chest loosened, just a fraction. "They'll be angry," she said. "Who?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "People," he nodded. "People usually are." Sirens came later, faint at first, then closer. He flagged them down with one arm, never letting go of the coat with the other. When paramedics knelt in front of her, she reached out blindly and grabbed his sleeve. "Don't go," she said. "I'm not," he replied, even though he knew he would have to. They wrapped her in thermal foil, asked questions she couldn't answer yet, lifted her gently onto the stretcher. He stepped back when told, hands empty now, cold rushing in where the coat had been. As the ambulance doors closed, she looked at him through the glass, eyes sharper than they should have been. She mouthed something he didn't hear. The engine pulled away. He stood there under the broken light, shivering now that the adrenaline had nowhere to hide. Across the city, engines changed direction. Somewhere closer than he expected, the road had noticed what he'd done. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know who was coming. All he knew was that the coat was gone. And somehow, the night felt warmer than it should have. The sirens faded, and the night rushed back in to claim what it could. He stood under the broken streetlight longer than he meant to, hands shoved deep into his pockets, shoulders hunched as the cold finally noticed him again. The bench was empty now. The space where she had sat still held the shape of her, a faint warmth already leaking away. People walked past. Someone glanced at him and then away. The city reassembled itself with the speed of something practiced. A bus hissed, doors opening and closing. A car honked 2 blocks down. Somewhere, laughter spilled out of a bar like it didn't know how close it had come to meaning something else. He turned and started walking. He didn't follow the ambulance. He didn't know where it was going, and even if he did, places like that had rules that didn't bend for people like him. He took the long route instead, staying under streetlights that worked, avoiding corners where the wind liked to wait. His hands burned now, the ache sharp and honest. He flexed his fingers until the feeling settled into something manageable. Cold you could work with, panic you couldn't. Halfway down the block, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He stared at the screen until it went dark again. A minute later, it buzzed once more. Still unknown. He didn't answer. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and kept moving. At the edge of the neighborhood, he ducked into the narrow alcove beside a closed hardware store, back pressed to brick, breathing slow. He waited there until the shaking stopped. He waited longer, just to be sure. Across the street, a bike rolled through the intersection, engine low, rider upright. It didn't slow. It didn't speed up. It just passed like it had a place to be that didn't include him. He didn't know why that made his chest tighten. When he reached the shelter, the volunteer at the desk looked up and then froze when she saw his coatless frame. "Where's your jacket?" she asked. He shrugged. "Gave it away." Her eyes narrowed, not unkind. "In this weather." "She needed it more," he said. That was all. She slid a cup across the counter without another word. He wrapped his hands around it and let the heat bleed back into him, careful not to rush it. Too fast and it hurt worse. He took a seat near the wall where the heater reached and stayed there, staring at nothing, replaying the way her teeth had knocked, the way her grip had tightened when the paramedic stepped in. He hadn't planned any of it. Planning implied options. Sleep came in pieces. He dreamed of engines he couldn't see and roads that bent away when he tried to follow them. He woke with his heart pounding and the taste of cold still in his mouth. Morning brought a different kind of noise. Phones rang. People spoke in low voices. Someone at the shelter turned the TV on and then off again, as if the sound itself was too much. He stepped outside and felt it immediately. The city's posture had changed, not louder, tighter. Across the street, a bike idled near the curb, rider helmeted, gaze fixed ahead. Another passed 10 minutes later. Then another, each one appearing like coincidence until coincidence started to look deliberate. He sat on the bench by the bus stop, the wind biting through his layers now that the coat was gone. He didn't regret it. Regret required imagining a better option. A woman approached, phone in hand, eyes bright with questions she hadn't earned. "Were you with the girl last night?" she asked. He didn't look at her. She was cold. "That's not what I asked." He met her gaze then, steady. "That's the answer." She hesitated, recalibrated, and stepped back, already dialing someone else. His phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time, a message appeared. "She's safe." No punctuation. No name. He closed his eyes and let the relief move through him without comment. Another message followed almost immediately. "They're looking for her." He typed back before he could think better of it. "I don't know anything." The reply came after a pause. "You did enough." He put the phone away and stared down the street. At the hospital, she woke fully as the sun climbed, confusion burning off into awareness that arrived sharper than it should have. Faces hovered, questions stacked, machines hummed. Someone asked her name twice. "Where's my coat?" she asked, voice hoarse. A nurse glanced at the chart. "We'll get you a blanket." "No," she said. "The coat." Somewhere down the hall, a phone rang. A voice answered too quickly. Back at the bus stop, the boy watched a city worker mark the curb with chalk and then step back, frowning like the math didn't add up. The chalk stayed. The worker left. A man approached him then, stopping a few steps away, posture calm, eyes sharp without being aggressive. He didn't introduce himself. "You were with her," the man said. "Yes." "You didn't ask who she was?" "No." The man nodded once as if confirming a theory. "Good." He glanced down the street, then back. "People are going to want to talk to you." "I already talked to her," the boy said. A corner of the man's mouth lifted. "That counts." "Who are you?" the boy asked. "Someone who cares about roads," the man replied. "And what happens on them." He took a step back. Already done. "If anyone asks you to change what happened, don't." "I won't." The man paused. "Why not?" "Because it didn't change," the boy said. The man studied him for a moment longer, then nodded and walked away, blending into the street like he'd always been part of it. By noon, the story had started moving without him. Descriptions passed between phones, routes were traced, people with vests and patches he didn't recognize stood at corners and watched the city like it might flinch. At the shelter, the volunteer set a folded blanket beside him. "You're shaking," she said. "I'm cold." She nodded. "It'll pass." He wrapped the blanket around himself and thought about the coat on her shoulders, about how something so simple had changed the direction of a night. Across the city, engines gathered and then dispersed, not rushing, not hunting, listening. He didn't know yet why that mattered. He only knew that whatever truth everyone was chasing had already been touched by his hands, quietly, without permission. And once that happened, it didn't belong to anyone else anymore. The city learned her name before it learned his. That was how these things always went. By the time the sun climbed high enough to burn the frost off the sidewalks, her face was moving through quiet channels, sent once, then again, then carried without commentary. Not to the news, not yet. To phones held low, to people who didn't ask questions out loud. The boy felt it without seeing it. He sat at the bus stop with the borrowed blanket around his shoulders, watching breath turn to steam and disappear. The street had developed a pulse, cars slowing, not stopping, people glancing, not staring. Attention without curiosity. That was new. Across the road, a bike idled at a light longer than necessary. When it finally rolled through, another took its place. Not chasing, not searching, positioning. He shifted his weight and kept his eyes on the pavement. At the hospital, the girl woke fully this time. Pain arrived first, sharp, contained, unwilling to be ignored. Then, memory, snapping into place in fragments, the streetlight, the cold, the coat pulled tight around her shoulders by hands that didn't hesitate. "Where is he?" she asked. A nurse paused. "Who?" "The boy," she said. "The one who gave me his coat." The nurse exchanged a look with someone off frame. "You're safe," she said carefully. That wasn't the question. Down the hall, a phone rang and was answered too quickly. Back at the bus stop, a man approached and stopped where the sidewalk widened, leaving space without asking for it. He wore no patches, no uniform. His jacket was plain. His eyes weren't. "You didn't take her to the ambulance," the man said. The boy didn't look up. "They told me to step back." "You could have followed." "Yes, but you didn't." "No." The man nodded once. "Good." The boy glanced at him then, measuring. "Why?" "Because following turns a moment into a claim," the man replied. "And you didn't make one." He held out a paper cup. Steam rose. The boy took it without ceremony and drank. "They're looking," the man continued, quietly. "For her." "Yes. And me." The man's mouth twitched. "Eventually." He glanced down the street, then back. "If anyone asks you to tell it differently, make it bigger or smaller, don't." "I won't." That's the right answer. The man stepped away and vanished into foot traffic like he'd never been there. By midday, the rumor reached the shelter. Not loud, not angry, confused. "She's someone's kid." "No, she's important." "They're searching the whole side of town." The volunteer turned the TV on and off again when a graphic flashed too close to truth. The boy kept his head down. His phone buzzed. Same unknown number. "She's asking for you." He stared at the words longer than necessary. "Is she okay?" The reply came fast. "She's stable. Cold exposure, nothing permanent." Relief hit him so hard he had to sit down. At the hospital, the girl insisted on sitting up. Pain be damned. When they brought her water, she drank and handed the cup back without looking away from the doorway. "He didn't ask my name," she said. Someone smiled politely. "He didn't need it." "Yes," she replied. "That's what matters." In the street, engines shifted. The bikes were closer now, not gathered, not dramatic, placed where intersections narrowed and lines of sight overlapped. People noticed and then pretended they hadn't. A city car slowed near the bus stop and rolled on. The boy stayed where he was. Late afternoon brought the first attempt to frame it. A woman approached with a badge turned just enough to be seen. Her voice was soft, practiced. "We want to make sure you're okay after last night." "I'm fine." Sometimes people don't realize they've been affected. He met her gaze. Sometimes they don't realize they've affected someone else. She blinked, then smiled. "We may have a few questions." "Put them in writing." Her smile thinned. "We prefer to talk." "Then we're done." She stepped back, already dialing. At the hospital, the girl's phone buzzed nonstop. She ignored it. "They want me to say something," she told the man who'd arrived and stood by the window. "To calm things." "And," he said. "I won't," she replied. "I won't calm anything that shouldn't be calm." She closed her eyes and pictured the boy's coat around her shoulders, the weight of it, the way it had cut the cold like a decision. By evening, the truth surfaced in pieces, not headlines, photographs, witness comments, a clip from a traffic camera that showed a small figure standing without a coat while another was wrapped in one. The city tried to catch up to it and couldn't. At the bus stop, the boy watched the sky darken and thought about how easily he could have walked past her, how simple it would have been to stay warm. He didn't regret it. A rider dismounted nearby and approached, helmet under his arm. He stopped 2 paces away and nodded. "She didn't know who you were," the rider said. "I didn't know who she was," the boy replied. The rider smiled faintly. "That's why this is finished." "Finished?" the boy asked. "For you," the rider said, "not for them." The rider walked away, engines starting in the distance, the sound layered and controlled. At the hospital, the girl finally slept, coat folded on the chair beside her bed like an anchor. Before closing her eyes, she sent a message. "Thank you for staying." At the bus stop, the boy's phone buzzed. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was already moving, quiet, stubborn, and impossible to warm with explanations. And the road, patient as ever, had begun to turn. The 4th day was when adults started lying carefully. Not outright. Not yet. They lied by selecting. He noticed it first at the bus stop, where the city worker stood too long pretending to fix something that didn't need fixing. The chalk mark from the night before was still there, but someone had drawn a line through it, as if canceling the evidence would cancel the moment. A woman stood nearby, phone angled low, filming nothing in particular. "Are you the boy from the video?" she asked. He didn't answer. "That coat, was it yours?" she pressed. He looked at the streetlight instead of her face. She was cold. "That's not what I asked." "It's what happened," he said. She frowned, recalibrated, and stepped back, already typing. By noon, the questions had shape. Not what did you do, but why were you there? Not how did she get lost, but why didn't you call sooner? The order mattered. It always did. At the shelter, a man he didn't recognize waited by the door with a clipboard held like a shield. "We'd like to clarify a few details," the man said, voice calm enough to feel rehearsed. "Just to make sure everything lines up." He didn't step closer. "Put it in writing." The man smiled politely. "We're just trying to help." "Who?" the boy asked. The smile faltered. "Everyone." "That's not an answer," the boy said. The man glanced past him, noting the rider across the street leaning against a pole, helmet off, eyes on nothing. He cleared his throat. "We'll follow up," he said, and left. At the hospital, the girl was sitting up now, brace loose around her arm, eyes sharp and awake in a way that made people uncomfortable. "They asked me if you pressured me," she said when he arrived. He blinked. "What?" "If you insisted I take the coat," she continued, "if you touched me without permission." "And I told them you asked first," she said, "and that I said yes." She studied his face. "They didn't write that down." Mark stood near the window, jaw tight. "They're building a version where intent replaces sequence." The boy leaned back against the wall. "Sequence matters." "Yes," the girl said. "That's why they're trying to move it." Outside, bikes appeared again, closer now, not surrounding, not threatening. Positioned where reflections caught them in glass and car doors, impossible to ignore without choosing to. A city car slowed, then continued on. The afternoon brought the first public framing, not a headline, a caption, a photo of the bus stop, empty bench, coatless figure blurred at the edge, words underneath, questions raised about safety during late-night incident, no mention of the girl, no mention of the cold. He saw it on a phone held by someone who thought he wasn't looking. "They're making you the risk," Ross said quietly when he found him back at the bench. The boy nodded. "That's easier." "For who?" "For anyone who wants this small," he replied. Ross smiled faintly. "You're learning." At dusk, the city tried again. A message appeared on his phone. New number, same tone. "We'd like to arrange a quiet conversation. No press, no consequences." He typed back slowly. "Put it in writing." The reply came after a pause. "Let's not escalate this." He looked up at the street, at the rider now joined by another, talking quietly, hands visible. "You already did," he typed. The message didn't respond. Night fell with tension still in it, like a wire pulled too tight. At the hospital, the girl refused another interview request and turned her phone off. "They think silence means control," she said. "And it doesn't," the boy replied. She smiled. "No, it means exposure." By late evening, the first crack showed. Someone posted the longer clip, the one that showed the boy shrugging out of the coat without hesitation, the girl's hands shaking as she took it, the moment where the cold clearly chose sides. The caption didn't editorialize. It didn't need to. At the bus stop, people stopped pretending not to watch. Across the city, engines adjusted course, not rushing, not converging, just aligning. Ross stood beside him, hands in pockets. "They tried to rewrite it," he said. And they forgot the order," Ross replied. "You can't change that without someone noticing." The boy sat back on the bench and felt the ache in his hands where warmth had left him days ago. He understood now why the coat mattered more than any explanation. It wasn't charity. It wasn't symbolism. It was sequence. And once sequence is witnessed, no amount of careful lying can put it back the way it was. By the fifth night, the city had stopped pretending it was confused. Now it was choosing. The bus stop had become a reference point, not officially, no tape, no cones, but people slowed there without realizing why. They adjusted their path, their pace, their posture. The place remembered something, and memory has weight. He sat on the bench, shoulders hunched, borrowed blanket wrapped tight. The wind slid along the street and failed to find him. He watched breath turn to fog and vanish. Across the road, a bike leaned against the curb, rider standing a few steps away, hands in pockets, eyes on the intersection instead of him. Another bike appeared 10 minutes later and stopped where reflections caught chrome in the shop window. No cluster, no message, just presence where presence altered behavior. At the shelter, the volunteer avoided the TV now. She didn't need it. People brought news with their faces, questions rearranged into conclusions, concern curdling into opinion. "They're saying you shouldn't have done it," someone murmured behind him, "that it was dangerous." He didn't turn. Dangerous was a word people used when they wanted the past to behave differently. His phone buzzed. New number. "We need to talk. For your own good." He read it, waited a count of 5, then typed back. "Put it in writing." The reply came slower this time. "We're trying to protect you." He slid the phone back into his pocket without answering. Protection that asked for silence was a kind of theft. At the hospital, the girl sat by the window with the brace resting easy, pain present but contained. Her coat, his coat, was folded on the chair beside her like an artifact that refused to become symbolic. "They asked me if I'd have survived without you," she said. He frowned. "That's not a fair question." "No," she agreed. "It's a useful one." "And I told them I don't answer hypotheticals," she said. "I answer events." She watched traffic slide by below. "They want to make this about judgment." "It was about cold," he said. She smiled faintly. "Exactly." Mark stood near the door, phone down now, listening more than watching. "They're trying to find a hinge," he said. Some point they can claim authority over. Do they have one? The boy asked. Mark shook his head. You didn't give them one. Outside, the bikes repositioned, riders trading places without speaking. The building felt watched, not threatened but accounted for. They're asking if I'll say anything publicly, she added. And I said no, she replied. Public turns this into a performance. He nodded. It shouldn't be. When he left the hospital, the air felt thicker, not colder, decided. The city had reached the point where it needed the story to end but couldn't decide how without admitting the wrong thing first. At dusk, a small crowd gathered near the bus stop. Not a protest, not a vigil. People stood where people always stood, but closer together than usual. Phones stayed in pockets. Conversations were low and unfinished. A man approached him, not young, not old, posture careful. You could have kept walking, the man said. Yes, the boy replied. And you didn't. No. The man nodded once, as if confirming a calculation. That's inconvenient. For who? The boy asked. For anyone who wanted this neat, the man said, and stepped away. Later, the attempt came. A city official arrived with a soft smile and a hard folder, stopping where the sidewalk widened. We'd like to relocate you temporarily, she said, just until things cool down. The boy stayed seated. Put it in writing. Her smile held. This doesn't need to escalate. It already did, he replied. You're late. She glanced across the street at the bikes, at the people watching without watching. Her eyes returned to him. We're concerned about risk, she said. He looked down at his hands, then up. The risk was cold. She didn't respond. She left without shaking his hand. The night settled with a brittle calm. The crowd thinned. The bikes stayed. The city waited. He wrapped the blanket tighter and leaned back, letting the bench support his weight. He thought about sequence, how events lined up when you didn't interfere with them, how changing the order broke the truth. He hadn't planned to be here 5 days later. He hadn't planned for any of this. But he understood now that the coat hadn't just kept her warm. It had fixed the order of things. Cold, choice, help. You couldn't reverse that without someone noticing. Across the city, engines adjusted again, quiet and deliberate. Somewhere, papers were being drafted and redrafted, words tested for whether they could carry the weight they'd been asked to hold. He stayed on the bench until the street emptied and the lights decided to stop flickering. The city had made its move. It had chosen discomfort over denial. And once that choice is made, the truth doesn't need anyone to protect it anymore. The 6th day was when the city tried to take the night back, not by force, by paperwork. He saw it taped to the shelter door just after sunrise, the paper too clean for the building it was stuck to. Temporary relocation, notice for safety and de-escalation. No names, no reasons, just authority pretending to be concern. The volunteer read it twice, lips pressed thin. They didn't tell us yesterday, she said. They said it came down this morning. He nodded. That tracked. Decisions like this were never sudden. They were just revealed late. Across the street, a city car idled, engine on, driver inside, watching the reflection in the storefront window instead of the shelter door. Ross appeared at his side, hands in pockets. They're trying to move you without saying your name, he said. Classic. Where? The boy asked. Anywhere that breaks the pattern, Ross replied. Anywhere that makes this bench irrelevant. The boy sat down anyway. If the bench stopped mattering, it wouldn't be because he stood up. By mid-morning, the questions changed again. Not accusations, instructions. A woman approached with a badge half visible, posture calm, voice lowered for privacy she hadn't earned. We need you to pack your things, she said. Transportation will arrive shortly. He didn't move. Put it in writing, she smiled tightly. This is for your protection. He looked past her at the idling car, then back. Protection from what? From attention, she replied. That's not protection, he said. That's removal. Her jaw tightened. You're making this harder than it needs to be. No, he replied. You're trying to make it easier than it should be. She glanced across the street. The bike that had been leaning there 10 minutes ago was joined by another now, rider dismounted, helmet off, talking quietly with the shop owner like nothing was happening. The woman lowered her voice further. If you don't comply, this can escalate. He nodded once, then escalated it properly. Silence. She stepped back, phone already in hand. We'll return. They didn't. Instead, the next move came sideways. By afternoon, the shelter staff were pulled into a meeting. Doors closed, voices lowered. When they came out, faces were tight. They want to shut us down for 48 hours, the volunteer said quietly. Inspection, health and safety. The boy stood. Because of me, she hesitated. They didn't say that. They didn't need to, he replied. Ross exhaled. That's the lever. The bikes began to arrive then, not suddenly, not loudly. Singles and pairs parking legally along the block, riders stepping off and standing where sidewalks widened, helmets off, hands visible. No crowd, no formation, just witnesses. A patrol car rolled by, slowed, then continued on. The city noticed. The shelter door opened again. The same woman from before returned, this time with another official whose shoes had never touched slush. We're postponing the relocation, the second official said, pending review. Which review? Ross asked. The official hesitated. Oversight. Good, Ross replied. The woman's eyes flicked to the bikes, to the phones now held lower but ready, to the volunteers who knew exactly what this inspection meant. We'll be in touch, she said. They left without another word. The notice stayed on the door for another hour. Then it came down. No announcement, no explanation, just absence. At the hospital, the girl heard about it before he did. They tried to move you, she said when he arrived, sitting straighter now, brace loosened, eyes sharp with something close to anger. I told them no. They asked you, he said. They tried, she replied. I reminded them they don't get to decide where truth lives. She looked out the window at the line of bikes thinning now that the point had been made. They're afraid of stillness, she added, because stillness lets people look. By evening, the city issued a soft correction online. Relocation under review. No immediate action. Ross read it and smiled faintly. That's the retreat. The boy sat back on the bench, exhaustion settling in now that nothing needed holding. His hands hurt, his shoulders ached. That was fine. Pain that stayed meant the danger had moved on. A rider stopped near him briefly, nodding once before walking on. You didn't move, the rider said. No, the boy replied. Good, the rider said, and left it at that. As night came down, the bikes thinned, and the block returned to its ordinary shape. The shelter lights glowed, people came and went, the bench stayed. He wrapped the blanket tighter and leaned back, staring up at the streetlight that no longer flickered. The city had tried to erase the place by removing him from it. It had failed, and in that failure, something important had settled. The truth wasn't loud, it wasn't mobile, and it couldn't be relocated. Tomorrow, they would try a different angle. But tonight, the story stayed exactly where it belonged. The seventh day was when the city tried to own the narrative, not the facts, the frame. By morning, the bench had a new companion, a temporary sign zip-tied to the pole beside it. Cleanup zone, move along. The words were printed in the same neutral font the city used when it didn't want to argue. The boy sat there anyway. People stepped around him, eyes flicking to the sign, then to him, then away. Authority only worked when it was obeyed. This wasn't disobedience, it was refusal to participate. Ross read the sign once and snorted quietly. They've stopped trying to move you, he said. Now they want you to look out of place. Isn't that the same thing? The boy asked. No, Ross replied. This is reputational. By noon, the next layer dropped. A short article appeared online. No headline meant to inflame. No accusations that could be challenged. Just careful language. Questions raised about late-night encounter between unhoused individual and missing minor. The words were chosen to do a job. They shifted weight without touching facts. They made concern sound like caution. They implied danger without naming it. The boy read it once and handed the phone back to Ross. They didn't say I did anything wrong, he said. They don't have to, Ross replied. They just need to make you feel like a risk. At the hospital, she read the same piece and laughed, once, sharp and humorless. They're trying to turn kindness into liability, she said. That's how you know they're losing. A man in a blazer stood near the doorway pretending to check messages. She raised her voice just enough. "He didn't approach me," she said. "He stopped because I was freezing." The man left. "They asked if I felt pressured," she continued. "I told them the cold was the only pressure in that street." The boy shifted his weight. "They'll keep asking." "Yes," she said, "but now they're asking the wrong people." Outside, the bikes redistributed again, not gathering, not surrounding, appearing near schools, near transit hubs, near offices where screens glowed late. Visibility moved away from him and toward the places that had tried to move him. The city noticed. A city car parked near the bench, officer inside, window down just enough to look casual. "You can't sit here," the officer said, tone neutral. The boy looked at the sign, then at the officer. "It's public." The officer hesitated, checked something on the dashboard, then nodded. "Just don't block anyone." "I'm not," the boy replied. The car drove off. Ross smiled faintly. "That was a test. Did I pass?" "You didn't move," Ross said. "That's passing." By afternoon, the article's comments section had turned. Not supportive. Suspicious of the city. Why wasn't there a report? Why was the girl found alone? Why did it take a stranger to help? Questions were contagious. At dusk, the shelter received another notice, not relocation this time. Review complete. Operations continue. No explanation, no apology. The volunteer exhaled like she'd been holding her breath all day. "They're backing off," she said. "No," Ross replied quietly. "They're changing targets." That night, the bikes gathered somewhere else entirely. Not near the bench, not near the shelter, at the building where permits were issued. No protest, no chants, just machines parked in neat lines and riders standing in silence where glass reflected them back into offices that preferred darkness. The boy stayed on the bench. He didn't need to see it to feel it. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. "They're asking if you'll give a statement to clarify." He typed back slowly. "There's nothing unclear." A pause. "Your silence is being interpreted." He looked up at the streetlight. Steady now, no flicker. "Good," he replied. The message didn't answer. Late that night, she sent him one last message. They tried to make this about danger. I told them it was about cold. He read it twice. "That's right," he typed back. When he put the phone away, the city felt different. Not friendly, not hostile. Adjusted. Like a structure that had taken load where it wasn't designed to and was now redistributing stress somewhere else. The seventh day ended without resolution. But something more important had happened. They had tried to turn his act into a problem and failed, because you couldn't make warmth suspicious without admitting how cold the system already was. The eighth day was when the city tried to outlast the memory. No new signs, no new notices, no officials standing too close to the bench pretending it was coincidence. The silence was deliberate. That was the danger. He felt it when he woke to a street that looked finished with him. The cleanup sign was gone. The officer didn't come back. Even the questions had stopped moving through the air like gnats. People wanted this to fade. Ross noticed it too. He stood a few steps away, watching commuters step around the bench without slowing. "They're hoping boredom does what pressure didn't," he said. "It won't," the boy replied. Ross glanced at him. "How do you know?" "Because she's still cold," the boy said. "And cold doesn't fade quietly." At the hospital, the change was more subtle but just as real. No interviews scheduled, no requests for clarification, no one asking her to repeat anything. She sat by the window with her coat folded beside her, brace loosened now, fingers testing strength like she was learning a new instrument. "They're waiting," she said when he arrived. "For what?" he asked. "For people to stop paying attention," she replied. "That's always the plan." Mark confirmed it later, voice low. "They've kicked it upstairs," he said, "which means they think time will protect them." The boy leaned against the wall, shoulder aching in the steady way of something healing slowly. "Time doesn't erase sequence." "No," Mark agreed, "but it does thin witnesses." Outside, the bikes were fewer now, not because they were leaving, but because they were spreading. One near the courthouse, one near city offices, one parked where permits were signed and decisions like to hide behind procedure. The road wasn't leaving. It was repositioning. The test of fatigue came that afternoon. A man approached the bench with a notebook closed and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. People are still confused, he said. Your voice could help. The boy didn't look at him. Put it in writing, the man laughed softly. That's not how conversations work. It's how facts work, the boy replied. The man waited, then tried another angle. Some are starting to ask why you didn't walk away. The boy finally met his eyes. Some always ask that. And what do you say? I say I was warm enough, he replied. The man walked away without smiling. At dusk, the city made its quietest move yet. A small update appeared on an internal page, easy to miss if you weren't looking. Incident review ongoing. No further public comment at this time. Ross read it and nodded. They're freezing the surface. They can't freeze what's underneath, the boy said. Ross smiled faintly. Exactly. That night the bikes gathered somewhere else again. Not near him, not near the shelter. At the courthouse steps, engines off, helmets carried, riders standing where cameras couldn't avoid them without choosing to. No speeches, no signs. Just time applied in the right place. The boy stayed on the bench. He didn't need to be there anymore, but leaving now would have felt like rewriting the ending. He'd learned that some places mattered only because someone refused to abandon them too soon. His phone buzzed. Her name this time. No numbers hidden. They asked me if I was scared of you, she wrote. His jaw tightened. And I told them the only thing that scared me was the cold, she replied, and that you didn't hesitate. He exhaled slowly. They don't like that, she added. They don't have to, he typed back. Across the street, a rider leaned against a lamppost, not watching the boy, watching the flow of people who noticed the rider and then noticed themselves noticing. The city was still watching its own reflection. Late that night, Ross sat beside him, quieter than usual. They're almost out of angles, he said. What's left? One more try, Ross replied. They'll make it about policy, about preventing this from happening again. That sounds reasonable, the boy said. It sounds reasonable, Ross agreed. Until you ask why it happened in the first place, the boy nodded. That's the door. Ross looked at him thoughtful. You found it early. I didn't know it was there, the boy said. That's why you opened it. The 8th night ended without resolution. No arrests, no statements, no apology. But something else had happened. The city had stopped asking him to explain himself. And when institutions stop asking questions, it's not because they're done. It's because the answers have started asking them. He wrapped the blanket tighter and leaned back, letting the streetlight warm his face. Tomorrow would bring the last move. He could feel it, and he already knew how he would meet it, the same way he had met the cold. By staying. The 9th day broke the stalemate, not with an announcement, with paper finally landing where it was never meant to. The boy felt it when Ross sat beside him and didn't speak for a long time. Silence from Ross meant something had crossed a line where words could only get in the way. They opened an emergency session, Ross said at last. The boy didn't ask where. He didn't ask who called it. Emergency meant someone had lost control of the clock. They're pulling records, Ross continued. Not summaries, originals. The boy stared at the street. About the night. And the days before it, Ross said. Who knew she was missing? Who delayed what? Who decided it wasn't urgent? That was the part the city had tried hardest to bury. At the hospital, the shift was immediate. The hallway outside her room emptied, then refilled with different faces. No more quiet suggestions. No more hovering suits pretending not to listen. Staff moved with purpose now, phones in hands, doors closing softly behind them. They asked me to sit with counsel, she said when he arrived. He frowned. Are you in trouble? No, she replied. They are. She stood without assistance, the brace still there but no longer defining how she carried herself. Pain existed. It just didn't lead anymore. They're asking about the time gap, she continued, between when they knew I was missing and when they acted like it mattered. And I told them exactly what I remember, she said, and exactly what I don't. Mark joined them, eyes sharp, posture settled into something like relief. They're not editing this one, he said. They can't. Outside the glass, bikes were parked in places that didn't ask permission, near municipal buildings, along the curb by offices that stayed lit too late. No gathering, no message, just memory refusing to fade. At the shelter, the effect showed differently. The bulletin board where notices had appeared and vanished was empty now, not cleaned, cleared. The volunteer looked at the boy and shook her head. "They're calling us witnesses," she said. "That's new," he replied. She smiled faintly. "That's overdue." By afternoon, the first resignation happened. No statement, no explanation, just a name removed from a directory and a replacement email sent out like nothing had happened. Ross showed him the update. "They're sacrificing distance," Ross said, "trying to slow the bleed." The boy nodded. "It won't." "No," Ross agreed, "because the door's open now." The city tried to regain footing with a release that said almost nothing. Incident under comprehensive review, further updates pending. It landed flat. People weren't asking what happened anymore. They were asking why it took so long. At dusk, the sealed house lost its tape. Not because the investigation was over, because the house had become evidence. Workers photographed the bolt, the chain, the scratches near the latch where someone had tested it more than once. They documented the room, the lack of exits, the soundproofing that no one wanted to explain. The boy watched from across the street, hands in his pockets. "That's it," Ross said quietly. "They can't shrink it now." Night fell with a different kind of quiet, not tension, finality approaching. The bikes gathered again, this time where consequences were written. Outside the courthouse, engines off, helmets carried. Not a protest, not a threat, a reminder. The boy didn't go, he didn't need to. His phone buzzed, her name. "They asked me what I want." He typed back slowly. "What did you say?" A pause. "I said I want the truth written the way it happened, without adjectives." He closed his eyes. That was enough. By midnight, subpoenas were moving. By morning, they would be unavoidable. The boy sat on the bench until the streetlights blurred into halos, shoulder aching, breath steady. He understood now that the hardest part hadn't been the cold. It hadn't been the waiting, it hadn't even been the pressure. It had been refusing to let silence finish what neglect started. The city had tried to wait him out. It had failed. And once that happened, there was only one direction left for the truth to move. Forward. The 10th day was when the city stopped pretending it still controlled the ending. It didn't say so out loud. It didn't need to. The change showed up in absences. The bench was empty when he arrived that morning. Not avoided, not claimed. Just empty, like a place that no longer needed guarding. The street moved normally around it, traffic flowing without hesitation, people stepping where they stepped before memory learned to linger. Ross joined him and didn't sit. "That's it," Ross said. The boy looked up. "What is?" "They filed," Ross replied. "Not a review, not an inquiry. Charges." The word landed heavy but clean. "Against who?" the boy asked. "Enough people to make excuses impossible," Ross said, "and high enough that no one wants to be quoted guessing." At the hospital, the difference was immediate. No careful smiles, no quiet warnings, no hovering shapes trying to listen without being seen. She stood when he entered, moving slowly but without help, Brace still present but no longer dictating her posture. The room felt finished with pretending. "They stopped calling me," she said. "That's good." "It is," she replied. "It means the paperwork took over." Mark stood near the window, phone down, hands relaxed for the first time in days. "Arrests pending," he said. "Formal charges signed, external oversight attached." The boy leaned against the wall and let the ache in his shoulder settle into something permanent and workable. "So it ends." "No," she said gently. "It lands." Outside the glass, bikes rolled past in ones and twos, not slowing, not signaling. The road had already moved on to the next thing. "They asked if I wanted to say something publicly," she added. "And you didn't." "I told them this wasn't a story about courage," she said. "It was about someone who didn't check who mattered." He looked down. "I didn't know." "That's why it matters," she replied. When he left the hospital, the city felt resolved under his feet, not lighter, not kinder, just done trying to negotiate. At the shelter, the clipboard by the door no longer carried extra pages. His name wasn't circled or flagged or noted. It existed where names belonged, without commentary. A volunteer handed him coffee without asking questions. "You good?" she said. "Yes," he replied. She believed him. By afternoon, the statement appeared. Plain, unadorned, impossible to spin. Charges filed following independent review. Proceedings ongoing. No adjectives, no framing, just consequence. Ross read it and nodded. That's the close. And the rest? The boy asked. They'll argue, Ross said, but not about what happened. As dusk settled, the bikes gathered one last time. Not many. Not loud. They parked along the block where the street widened naturally, engines cooling, helmets off. No speeches, no formation. Cole was there. He met the boy's eyes and inclined his head once. The girl arrived quietly, coat pulled tight, walking without assistance now, steps careful but sure. She stopped beside him and looked at the street like she was measuring something already decided. They're in awe, she said softly. Of what? He asked. Of the fact that you didn't know who I was, she replied, and you stayed anyway. He shrugged. Anyone would have. She shook her head. Most people didn't. A man stepped forward from the riders, older, calm, voice low. You didn't know her name, he said. No, the boy replied. You didn't wait for permission. No. You didn't ask what it would cost. The boy thought of the coat, the shaking hands, the way Cold made decisions urgent. I didn't have time, the man nodded once. Exactly. They didn't bow then. Not yet. They removed their helmets and stood still for a breath. No movement, no sound. A pause, long enough to mark that the work was finished. Then they mounted up and rode away in pairs, engines low, the road taking them back without ceremony. The city didn't follow them with its eyes. It didn't need to. Later that night, the boy sat alone by the fence, the repaired slat solid beneath his hand. The bench felt ordinary again, which was the best ending he could imagine. His phone buzzed once. They filed it right, the message read. He typed back 2 words. That's enough. And it was. Tomorrow would bring courtrooms and calendars and names spoken in rooms he would never enter. None of it required him. His part had ended the moment he chose warmth over distance and stayed when leaving would have been easier. Everything after that was just the city, learning how to live with the truth. The 12th morning came without ceremony. No engines, no watchers, no one standing where they didn't belong. The street looked like it had always looked. Patched asphalt, the bench cold and honest, the street light fixed for good this time. Even the air felt different, lighter, not because something good had happened, but because something heavy had finally been put down. He sat on the bench with his hands wrapped around a paper cup, steam rising and fading before it could mean anything. The blanket lay folded beside him, not needed now. Nothing was needed. The city had moved on. That was how he knew it was finished. At the courthouse across town, names were read into record, dates set, processes engaged that did not ask for commentary or forgiveness. The story no longer belonged to people who shaped language. It belonged to documents that didn't care who approved of them. He didn't go there. He didn't need to. Ross passed by once, nodding without stopping, already halfway into whatever came next. No words, no summary. That, too, was an ending. Later, his phone buzzed. One message, no number hidden, no explanation attached. I'm on the road, walking without help. Don't let anyone turn this into something else. He read it once and slid the phone back into his pocket. That was enough. At the shelter, nothing had changed, and everything had. The volunteer handed him coffee without asking where his coat was. No clipboard lingered. No one whispered when he entered. He was just another person moving through a warm space, which was exactly what he had always been. Someone laughed about something unimportant. Someone argued about nothing. Life returned to its natural volume. In the afternoon, he walked past the house without looking at it. The door was shut. The basement was empty. The lock meant nothing now. It wasn't his problem anymore. By evening, the city lights came on one by one, not hurried, not anxious. Cars passed, buses stopped and went. People chose paths without thinking about why those paths existed. He returned to the bench one last time, sat, and let the ache in his hands remind him of weight once held and released. Not pride, not trauma, just memory. He understood now what had shocked everyone. It wasn't that he gave away his coat. It wasn't who she turned out to be. It was that he didn't know and didn't need to, that the choice came first, that warmth came before names, that help didn't wait for permission or context. That kind of act doesn't turn someone into a hero. It turns a moment into a line the world can't cross back over. When he stood and walked away, no one watched him go. The road didn't follow. The city didn't comment. Somewhere far away, engines moved again. Not for him, not because of him, just moving. He lay down that night with his pack under his head, the blanket folded beside him, untouched. His hands rested open on his chest, steady. The truth had already done what it came to do. Everything after that belonged to the road, and the road, once satisfied, always keeps going.